On June 8th, 2025, Norfolk Southern's at the time brand new D&H Heritage Unit, number 1080, rolled into Elkhart Yard on 13Q. There were rumors going around that the unit was supposed to be part of some special event in Elkhart Yard on June 12th. I was skeptical at first, but when the unit got put on 13Q and headed straight into Elkhart Yard, the suspicions and rumors seemed to be confirmed. Except they weren't. On June 12th, the unit was in fact in Elkhart Yard, but it was just in the diesel shop getting some maintenance. The reason it had come to Elkhart was, the toilet broke. This isn't a joke. And they needed to get it fixed in Elkhart shops. Why didn't they just do it in Juniata? Yeah, it's beyond me. But anyways, it was stopped in Elkhart for maintenance, and it was buried in the diesel yard and in the loco shop. I had no idea, so on June 12th, I decided to head to Elkhart in hopes of spotting it. My dad picked me up, and my brother was actually going along for this trip, which is something that he doesn't normally do, so that was pretty exciting. Anyways, after quite a while of driving, we eventually arrived at Elkhart Yard, where we were going to stop first, and then we would head over to the National New York Central Museum to look at it and do some rail fanning. As we approached Elkhart Yard, this trimmer set instantly caught our attention, and I'm sure you can see why. In the lead on it was Norfolk Southern 6144, which is the horseless unit. It doesn't have a horse on the front. I have no idea how this happened. I was thinking for a long time it could have been vandalism, but after seeing it in person, it looks pretty official, and those lines are pretty straight, so I've got no clue. This unit is rarely documented, as it's been held captive in Elkhart Yard as long as it's been in this paint scheme. In fact, as far as I was able to find, there's only one other picture of it on the internet. Nearby was a Norfolk Southern local about to go out, and the power from the Canadian National Norfolk Southern transfer, including a rare SD75i and an X-City rail. We weren't here for long, but we did see a yard movement pulling out of the yard, with an SD40-2 and a Jeep. This was pretty cool, and at first I thought it was a local because of how far it moved, but as you can tell by the lights on the top of the SD40, it's in remote control operation right now. Now I'm going to shut up so you can hear these EMDs, because I haven't seen an NSEMD in years. After that yard job came to a stop right in front of me, we headed down the yard to see if we could spot anything interesting. You might have noticed the continuous welded rail cars that are sitting in front of the 3 Canadian National engines. There's a lot of maintenance going on in Elkhart right now, so it makes sense why the CWR train was here. Sad it was blocking my clear shots of the 2 CN engines though. However, as the end of this freight train started to clear, this happened.
Oh, we hit the jackpot. There's two high hoods.
Operation Lifesaver, no way!
Oh my god, it is Operation Lifesaver.
There, sitting in the yard, was a set of 5 Norfolk Southern yard engines. 2 of them were high hoods, one was an Operation Lifesaver unit, one was a road slug, and one was an SD40, which was in the thoroughbred scheme. All of these engines are cool on their own, but seeing them all together in a line like this was really awesome. Too bad the CWR train was right in front of them, but it would move a little bit later, which we'll eventually get to see. Also here, we saw another set of trimmers made up of 2 SD40-2s this time, and they moved eventually to go back farther into the yard and pick up another cut of cars. After this, we got back on the road and continued farther down the yard and eventually passing that trimmer set we just saw and the Loco shop where 1080 was unfortunately being kept this day, and also the yard control tower. Beyond this point, we get into the thick of the yard, which unfortunately doesn't really have that many locomotives in it, as it's pretty much just car storage, but we do get to pass the fueling rack here, where trains that are stopping for crew changes refuel. As we continued farther down the line, we eventually reached the end and pivoted our focus from the yard to going to the National New York Central Museum to railfan and see the traffic. However, that meant we had to pass under the yard, and as we were doing that, this happened. This slug set with one of the former Alco slugs, number 858, was stopped on the bridge as we were driving underneath it. Yeah, this was pretty cool as well. Even though these slugs really don't quantify as Alcos because, well, they aren't Alcos, they're just slugs, they do at the very least have the distinctive Alco ends, as you might see on an RS-27. So they're basically the closest you're going to get to an Alco running on a Class 1. And driving underneath one was also very cool.
It's right underneath the slug.
When we arrived at the museum, we noticed something very strange. These guys pulled in. They were City of Elkhart guys, as you can see by the logos on the side of their equipment. And they had a forklift. They unloaded the forklift at the museum, and even the museum staff seemed confused at what the heck was going on. So I asked the guys, yo, what's going on with this? And they said that this forklift was to be used in the museum renovation. The museum is undergoing major renovations right now, as they are basically screwed without the 3001 Mohawk in terms of displays, unless they innovate and do more interesting things, which we'll see soon. And speaking of that 3001 Mohawk, here it is, no longer owned by the City of Elkhart and is now property of the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. I so want to get out here when they move this thing to Fort Wayne. I really want to see how they're going to accomplish pulling it out of the museum. But I don't really know if I'm going to be able to get a good shot, especially considering how many foamers are inevitably going to be here to film that exact same thing. Other than the 3001, the only original New York Central engine that's slated to be here in a few months is the 4085E unit. And of course, the 4882 Penn Central GG1 is still here. But what's next to it is the real exciting part. This whole area was under construction last time I was here, so I was shocked to see it was turned into a miniature railway. It looks pretty good, and I'd love to ride on it eventually if, it has coaches and stuff. I'm assuming it does. Maybe it's one of those pedal-along trams like they have at the Hoosier Valley Railroad Museum. I'm not sure. But either way, it's still cool and definitely a nice expansion to the museum. Since it was so hot, I sat in this caboose, which was the only shade available, waiting for something to be moving on the main line. There was nothing on the main line. After an hour, I decided, okay, maybe I can take a break and go inside and look at the model trains. That's exactly what I did. They were running a completely different selection of engines from last time, including Amtrak 156, which is the Phase 1 Heritage unit. I made a joke with my brother that this was the toasted one, 161, but I felt very embarrassed after I noticed the number 156. They were also running a steam engine model, the first time I've ever seen that at the New York Central Museum. This being a New York Central Yard Goat 080 switcher number 415, however, it appears it was running on a mainline freight. I can't really judge them though, there's just no yard in the layout.
Got it? Good job, Brody. The bridge is right there, and they're going to go over the bridge. There's so many cars over here.
For New York Central representation, they had a PA in a lightning bolt scheme, which was racing a Florida East Coast GP9 pulling a NASA train set, which also met with the Amtrak while I was filming it. This was one of 3 New York Central engines running on the layout, the other being the 080 Yard Goat, and the third one being a GE U-boat, which was the next and last engine I filmed. I would have filmed more to get different shots of all the engines, but I did manage to snag a quick shot of all of them before returning outside just so that I wouldn't miss anything running on the main line. When I got out, I realized that thankfully I hadn't missed anything. And I would continue to not miss anything because still nothing was running on the main line. I had been here for 2 hours at this point, and I was starting to get concerned that maybe the main line was shut down or something. However, with more time to wait, I decided to take the opportunity to run down to the end of the museum to get a few quick shots of this South Shore multiple unit car, which I didn't get to see any of last time because some guys were standing down here doing sketchy stuff last time I was at the museum. However, I did get a view of the main line and saw what looked like a Norfolk Southern local with two C6Ms sitting down there. Unfortunately, it was facing away from us, so we wouldn't be seeing this train. We headed to DQ to get lunch, as now it was lunchtime. We also decided to eat ice cream while we were there because, well, it was hot, as I previously mentioned. We slowly ate our food at DQ for 40 minutes, and we had the Elkhart cam up the entire time, hoping that nothing would come by while we were there. And nothing did. When we got back, we decided to park on the side of the Amtrak station so we could see what was coming in from the east. And still nothing came for a while, before finally, 3.5 hours after the last train, we saw headlight glare in the distance of not a yard train. It was Norfolk Southern 12N, the daily manifest to Conway, Pennsylvania, pulling out of the yard. But just as I was getting in position to film it, the lights turned off. I was a little confused for a second until I realized, wait a minute, this is a low priority train. It's probably stopping for a westbound. And that was all confirmed when I whipped my camera around just in time to see Norfolk Southern 260 round the curve, with a friendly crew and Dash 9 and trail making this a nice catch. Now that trains were running again, I realized that there had to be a big rush now that the line had been closed for so long and was finally back open to traffic. And that was proved right, as not even 5 minutes after the tail end of 260 cleared, the horn of Norfolk Southern B23W sounded in the distance. When I heard this, I was ecstatic. Who wouldn't be? It's the horn of a standard cab. And as it rounded the bend, I realized that the standard cab was actually the least interesting thing on this train, because right behind it was Joe. The caboose. His name's Joe. It's a long story. Anyways, the caboose being used as a shoving platform behind the engine was absolutely the highlight of this train and the entire trip. I never thought I'd see a caboose in revenue service on a Class 1, but here we are. We thought now that 12N would move, but nope, there was more trains that were still blocking its path because, man, there was a lot. The next one we saw was actual 260 being led by some GE junk. After the head end passed, I took the opportunity to take some nice B-roll of the intermodal cars of 260 passing the Elkhart sign and the Conrail caboose that's stored in the museum before I was jump scared by 27G spontaneously materializing out of nothing, and it met with the end of 260.
Boco!
Now I was sure that 12N had to get moving, and those suspicions were proven correct when I saw the bottom two headlights of the leading ace turn on. I attempted to run all the way down to the end of the platform to catch it going around the curve, but the train beat me there. The train had an extremely interesting consist, though. The leading ace was nice, but it was the mid-DPUs that were really interesting, because the first of the two was NS 4208, which sounds like a normal C6M and looks like a normal C6M. However, it was rebuilt from NS-9 8967, and if you know your train facts, you would know that this is 8967. Because it was involved in the infamous Kismet, California train collision in 2006. Needless to say, it was very cool to see a survivor of such an infamous train collision on Norfolk Southern, even if it is in a rebuilt state. Funnily enough, this isn't the first Kismet collision survivor I've seen on the NS Chicago line, as I've caught Norfolk Southern 3517 a couple times, which started off as BNSF 7065, which is also involved in the collision. But I'm getting off topic, and I'm just going to show you the train now. After it passed, I looked into the yard and was quite shocked to see the end of that CNSD75I, or so I thought, and the next city rail, which is the same one from earlier, or so I thought. And eventually, after a while, we caught the very front of this Norfolk Southern yard job. On the way out, we decided to once again stop by Elkhart Yard, and we saw a couple trains, the first being the CPKC train, which was actually stopped at the fueling rack, getting its rear DPU, KCS 4811, fueled up. We drove so far down the train that we eventually came across the leader, Canadian Pacific AC44, number 8150, which, I mean, yeah, it's CPKC, you expect to see these two together. As we continued, we saw the two trimmer engines we saw earlier, the Jeep and the SD40-2, before we stopped by that same line of engines with the two high hoods to get better looks at the leading one, 5222, and the Operation Lifesaver unit, as now they had moved the CWR train slightly. Then we saw the other set of trimmers that we saw while we were first passing the yard, now with a single boxcar, and was able to film them passing us. And on the way out, we spotted the 3 CN engines still sitting there, which very much confused me because that meant the XCD rail and ST75 I saw earlier couldn't have been the same ones. I don't actually know what happened here. It was probably just 2 very similar sets of CN power arriving in Elkhart Yard on different days. But yeah, that's all for this quick day trip to Elkhart. I hope you enjoyed, and something, brain fog. Oh yeah, catch those units while you can, especially the cabooses. Wait, those aren't units. Catch those rare rail vehicles while you can, especially the cabooses, and I'll see you in the next video.